From FL1 News, you're listening to episode 184 of the Inside the FLX podcast. Today we dive into rural Ontario County, where there is a contested race for Town Supervisor. My guest this hour is Randy Walker. He is one of the candidates looking to create some change in the town of Richmond, and there is plenty to discuss. Randy, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate you having me here.
So what I want to start with is sort of, if you can recall what that moment was like when you sort of came to the realization, I'm sure you were talking to your wife and friends and family, when you knew that you were going to run for town supervisor. Obviously, you have been involved in politics in the past.
Oh, yes.
So what was that moment like, and what led you to the decision that you did make?
The moment I realized was when I saw that the officials in the town were basically having tunnel vision, and they were making financial decisions that only looked a year ahead. They were accumulating a lot of cash, and they had no plans of how that cash would be spent. And I don't believe that's the right way to run it.
We tend to see a lot of cases like this bubble up and happen over and over again, where these small communities, these small rural communities, tend to be operating, like you said, in that sort of 1 to 2 year outlook, as opposed to having that longer
Yes,
vision. And you've been on the town board before.
Yes.
Is that something that you've seen sort of historically happen over and over again, where they tend to focus on the short term rather than the long term?
Yes. On the town board, that's true. Now, on the school board, I learned that that's not how you get anywhere in the future. You need to have a plan before you can get anywhere, and the town really doesn't have a plan. They are basically in a reaction mode.
And this is, for many who are listening to this, they're going to take a lot from this conversation and apply it to their own community, because
Sure.
this is not a unique problem. What are some of the things that you think, just little steps that a town board like Richmond could take to sort of remedy that and come up with better plans, so that they are looking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ahead, as opposed to what's going to happen 6 months from now?
Right. Well, first of all, you have to get input from the community. It can't just be what you want or the other people on the board want. That's the first and most important thing. And then you would put it into a 1 year, 3 year, and a 5 year plan. Now, the state controller's office wants each town to do what's called a fund balance policy, which means how much cash are you going to have on hand for an emergency? Not for every situation. They want you to have not too much and not too little. So our town has a problem of too much cash and without a plan. And I think that that's not the way that towns should operate, because the people that are paying the taxes now are not assured that anything is going to be done with that while they're living or while they're still in the town. So you're not getting the benefit of the money that you're putting in. Now, the state controller's office, I think, would rather see it that you come up with a plan and then go and look for the money, and then the people that are paying for it are the ones that are getting the benefit from it in real time.
And it's interesting because it sort of creates this dynamic where some folks can say, and I'm sure a few public elected officials in Richmond have said this, but we're saving money. We're saving money. We're doing this in the right way. But the reality is that the Comptroller's office also sees this as a means to lower taxes, lower the burden on those who are paying taxes in a town like Richmond or Seneca Falls, or pick your community.
Right.
So how much of this is just sort of adopting and understanding a new way of thinking, or a new way of approaching how you delve into town finances and town politics for seats that may change every 4 or 2 years, depending on position?
Right. There is a turnover. That's why it's important to have policies and procedures in place that will guide a future board and the present board. right now, because of that lack of planning, we have spiked the taxes this year 16%, but there's no plans of what that money is going to be used for. And 2 years ago, the taxes were spiked 15%. Now, 2 years ago was my Republican opponent that spiked the taxes, and this time my Democratic opponent spiked the taxes. And that just shows you that there's a lack of planning, because why would you spike the taxes if you had a long-term plan? You would get to things gradually and one step at a time. Some of my opponents, I believe, try and what I call swing for the fences. They look for those big projects that'll make their name or whatever. I'm a person that believes that you can do it one step at a time, and you can get a long ways just going one step at a time.
And I think it's important for people to sort of grasp and understand. You're talking about a 30% increase over the course of just a few years in terms of what taxpayers are putting out every year.
Correct. 2 years ago, when they spiked the taxes 15%, it was for a good reason. They did repave the parking lot at the town hall, which basically was the whole 15%. But since there was no plan, you're going to be paying for a new parking lot every year going till forever. There's no plan what that money will be used for the second year, the third year, the fourth year. Those taxes go on forever. And this year, we were told by our supervisor that we are in good financial position, but yet they pushed through a 16% tax increase because sometime in the future we might need that money. Right now we have approximately $800,000 cash just sitting there without a plan of how it's going to be used, and that is just not good management practices.
So as you sort of look at that and look at the fact that you have multiple years of tax increases without a long-term vision, when this happened the first time around, did there seem to be any discussion or debate about, well, this is a temporary tax increase, this won't be forever, since it is for specific things? It sounds like it might have been proposed that way, but then the money was just sort of kept and it was just maintained despite there not being a true purpose.
Right. There was no talk of that, and that 15% from 2 years ago, I was the only board member that voted against it because I didn't see how that money was going to be used in an effective way after the 1 year. It just bothered me. And this relates when I went around getting signatures. I talked to people who are on fixed incomes, and this year they got a 16.2% tax increase, plus their assessments went up. And I saw concern, and a few people I saw fear on their face, because almost to a T, everybody I talked to said that they love living in our town, and I do too.
And to that end, when you're talking about, I would assume, a community that has fairly low taxes to begin with, you're talking about money that really adds up in the grand scheme of things. You're talking about taking a community who may have a very small tax burden in the grand scheme of some of the larger communities around.
Oh yeah.
But if that happens 2 or 3 years in a row, or over a couple cycles, all of a sudden, that's a tangible amount of money that can have an effect, right?
Right. And people who are on fixed incomes, their income is not going up to match that at all. I understand their frustrations and fears.
So you mentioned as far as the planning goes, the tunnel vision, and that's the way you described it, tunnel vision.
Yes.
From elected leaders. How do you break that? How do you sort of break that and create a better vision so that the community is being heard? Do you think there needs to be more effort on the part of elected officials to get the take and the opinion of the residents, the taxpayers, even if maybe they don't show up to town board meetings? Because I know that's one of the the fallbacks for a lot of elected leaders in the region is, well, nobody came to this meeting, so I guess everybody's fine with it.
Well, in our town, people show up for board meetings. It can be a pretty hot seat sometimes. I think communicate to the public. Right now, there's very little communication to the public. The public tends to hear things after they're already done. and you involve the community by telling them what you plan on doing and asking for feedback. You find out by calling people, talking to people, listening to people. I think listening is one of the best leadership skills that anybody can have, and it's, believe it or not, it's a hard skill sometimes.
Yeah. Now, one of the points that we sort of chatted a little bit about before we came on here was the desire for a lot of elected leaders to seek out and search for quote-unquote shovel-ready projects.
Yes.
Is that one of maybe the big issues with government and how it works on the local level in general across the board?
I can't speak for other communities. A lot of people put up ideas and that they think are important, but to get grants, you have to have a shovel-ready project. Otherwise, it's just an idea. Right now, we have probably 2 projects that should be done and are being ignored as far as I'm concerned. One of those is putting in sidewalks in our town. To me, I mean, we do have sidewalks on half of our main street, but the other half does not have it. And it makes it a more walkable district. The town right now is got a grant to have a transportation study in the town. And that study is not due to be released until 2021, which means that the way it's going now, you won't see sidewalks until 2022 at the soonest. But right now, we have a plan that was done up by the town engineer 2 years ago, which could be implemented. Now, the reason why you have shovel-ready, that's no grant money is going to come to a project until you have shovel-ready plans. So that's probably the hardest part, is taking an idea and getting it up to being a project that'll attract money. We did 2 water projects in our town. We put those up, and then we got a little over $2 million in grants for those projects, and that included also a culvert project. So that illustrates to me how important it is to have shovel-ready projects. And I'm going to relate back to the fund balance here. Both of my opponents seem to have the misguided opinion that you have to have all the money before you start a project. To me, that's like saying, well, you can't buy a house until you have all the money to buy the house, and you're going to be paying for that house until it's all paid off, and then you get to live in it. So that's how we're sort of approaching our finances and our taxes. I guess that's all I got on that one.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point. Obviously, taxpayers are always concerned about spending. That's the one thing that folks tend to not want to see a ton of, or at least not without good planning, like you mentioned. When it comes to infrastructure, which is, of course, always seems to be the most expensive area that any municipality can spend. Where does that fall in the pyramid of concern for taxpayers? Is it near the top, or is it one of the things that sits toward the bottom, and most residents are kind of happy with the way infrastructure sits for Richmond right now?
Well, I don't see that people are dissatisfied with the infrastructure we have right now. We have a public beach, which is nice during the summer. We've got a nice park, which borders Main Street and East Lake and West Lake Road. I think it's a quaint little town, but it needs to be tidied up. And so when people drive through, people will be saying to themselves, wow, this is a nice little town. Maybe I'd like to come back here again. And a family drives through and say, maybe we should think about moving here. This is really a nice place to live.
Now, when you talk about having those natural resources at your fingertips, in terms of expanding the rec program, that's another sort of platform point for you. Are those two kind of held hand in hand when it comes to coaxing some of those folks who might say, maybe Richmond is the place for me?
Well, I think for families, we are a pretty isolated community. We're probably 25 minutes away from, like, let's say, Canandaigua, Geneva. We're sort of out in the middle of nowhere. We have a great school, K through 12, which I'm really proud of for our school, and I think it offers a great school for families. But I lost my thought.
That's fine. Just take
What was the
original.
question? Could just
How are the rec
Yes, the
rec
rec,
expansion
right.
tied to
Right.
natural resources?
Right. So it's very important that our town offer opportunities for children and families that offer them a different, all different types of experiences. I mean, when you're in a small town, you're kind of isolated, and the more activities and opportunities and skills which you can offer, I think it's what will attract families.
And when you talk to a lot of folks, especially young people, that's exactly what they tend to be looking for, is that experience, as opposed to necessarily having access to all of the things or certain things. So when you're going through that thought process, and you have those natural resources, how has this not become a higher priority over the last decade, when this has clearly become the trend across the state, where
Right.
Catering to natural resources and building on that
Yes.
is it works.
Right.
No
No doubt
arguing
about it. No doubt about it. I had an opportunity to go up to a town that's on Lake Champlain that has a beach, and they had a place where they were renting out kayaks, paddle boats, and stand-up paddle boards. The town was doing it themselves. And I thought that was really great. What they were charging was reasonable, but it's just something more that you can offer families. Also on the north end of our town, we have a small boat launch, which is used not during the summer because it's right next to our swimming area, but that whole thing is a real eyesore right now. And I think it wouldn't take much to make that look better. And I think it would attract more people when they see that the town values itself. I mean, you go there now, and it looks like, oh, this is something we don't really care about. But people are going there, they do care about it.
And sort of going back to this discussion about long-term planning, which seems to be at the center of your campaign. Obviously, this is something that would require a lot of long-term planning to sort of rebuild or build out that rec program further. That said, transparency is also another one of the big issues that people tend to have with local government in general. How do you feel like the transparency wing can be improved, even if sort of in steps over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, to make residents a little more comfortable with how things are?
Right. Well, I think it would be important to write a letter to the community once a month and put it on the website and any local papers who would pick it up. Right now, we're not doing that. Typically, when I've been on the town board before and the school board, the president of the school board or the town supervisor would write a monthly letter to inform people what's going on, what's been done, and what we're looking at for the future. And unfortunately, that's not being done. I mean, it's important that the people know what you're doing. Otherwise, I think there's a certain amount of cynicism that settles in. Another thing which I think would be quite helpful would be to put a message marquee out front to inform people of different events that are going on, meetings, and right now that would be a way that people just driving through can quickly look at a marquee and know what's going on in the moment, and if they want to know more, they can go up to our website. And also I'd like to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Also, I'd like to see us digitize the minutes from planning boards and zoning boards going back, I would say, 25 years, so that the record of how property got to be where it is can be looked at and understood and held to the standard that the permits were given to those properties.
And I'm glad you mentioned that last point, digitizing, because that tends to be one of the common gripes that we see with local government, especially small towns, is that there isn't enough effort put into making sure that records aren't just hard copy, paper, physical, that they're also digital and that they're easily accessible.
Searchable, yes.
Yeah, searchable. Is that something that, residents have been sort of talking to you about over as you talk to them?
Not really, but I know that would be appreciated. Our town website, I was asked to build our town website. I was a website developer for a while before I retired, and that was one of the things I thought was really important. So I personally digitized the town board minutes going back to, I think, 2006, 2005. And I know I look at those, and I know other people do too, but they could go back further, and there's no reason not to. There's very little cost to doing it, and I think it's important for people to know.
And sort of, I want to end on a note that some folks who might just be jumping in at the end of the conversation can sort of get a grasp for where you stand. What is the sort of elevator pitch to your candidacy? What is the thing that you're trying to leave with residents, no matter how much or how little you talk to them, to sort of highlight exactly what you are as a candidate?
I would say that the reason why I am running is I see a lack of transparency. I don't see planning going on for the community, and it concerns me that you really have a hard time getting anywhere without a plan. I don't believe in the philosophy that we're using right now for taxing and accumulating money. And because of that, I really don't see much progress. The only progress that I see going on now are projects that were started more than 2 years ago, and they're just being finished up, but I don't see any new projects on the horizon at this point. And I think that my experience and knowledge and my understanding of how the laws work are a lot different than what's going on in the board right now. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's just that I have taken the time to read it. It's something that I like reading about, and I would work very hard to accomplish goals for our town that would benefit everybody. I believe that if you increase the quality of life for the folks that live there, that's what's going to attract other folks to want to live there also.
Randy, appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for the pause. Yeah.